Mr. Begley, members of the board, we do have 4 items for board discussion this evening. Our first item for discussion is in regard to bus purchasing and financing. So at this time, I will turn it over to Mr. Perry and Mrs. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Bagley, members of the board, as you may recall at the last meeting, we had an item for board discussion in regards to the bidding of the buses. That was 8 general education and 1 special ed bus. During that discussion, I highlighted that Mrs. Lee would discuss the financial options and provide a recommendation. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mrs. Lee.
Thank you. So as a result of the bid process opening, we also included options for financing. We had 3 different options for financing: 48 monthly, 60 monthly, 72 monthlies. The lease interest rates varied between 4.5% and 6.65%. So given those interest rates and the interest rates we're earning on our investments, it would cost us almost a bus to lease those buses. So I'm going to make the recommendation that we purchase the buses at this time. I don't know if anyone has any questions or... Nope.
Nope. Yeah, I don't think so. All right. Our next item for discussion is the district's 5-year forecast. At this time, I'll turn it right back over to Mrs. Lee.
Thank you. So today, we're going to present the 5-year forecast for November. I do want to highlight that it is a forecast, and it's fairly fluid. In the life of this forecast, we will have 3 different presidents. We'll have 3 different budget bills. We don't know what the state's going to do in any of those budget bills, so the further we get out in the forecast, the less reliable it is. And we can highlight the assumptions that we're making to support the numbers in the forecast, but once you get to the 5 years, if somebody were to look at November of 24 and look at November of 29, those numbers are going to be pretty different. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. This is also a pretty global overview. If anyone wants to see the details behind the 5-year forecast, we'll have it in the office and on the website, and encourage people to look at that. I'm going to try to figure out how to use the clicker. Look at that. So the purpose of the 5-year forecast is basically to engage the Board of Education as well as the community and the financial operations of the district. It also is what we use to be able to certify expenditures for the district, called a 412 certificate. And it provides the auditor of state as well as Department of Education and Workforce with a tool to monitor school districts' financial solvency. A quick overview of our property tax collections. We have a 39% residential property tax base. We're anticipating this year those taxes will go up by about 3%. A 0.6% increase, which is incredibly small for the following year, and then 2.3 between 26 and 27. The district is not at the 20 mil floor, and so I think it's important to know that even though taxpayers experienced a very significant increase in their taxes this year, schools don't get that money. So our taxes get reduced through a fairly complicated formula for schools only that brings that millage down to generate about the same amount of money that it generated when the millage was originally passed. And once you're at the 20 mil floor, you will get growth on your millage. We're not there yet. We will reach that in the lifetime of this forecast, however. Actually, it could be as soon as next year. If you guys have questions at any point in the presentation, stop me, but.
I do think it's important, not to interrupt. We
That's okay.
did talk about this the other day. There is also legislation being proposed right now that would change what she just talked about with the 20 mil floor to where schools who do hit that would not see an increase. So in the past, we've talked about how certain school districts are benefiting from that and some were not. And in Butler County, I believe that Fairfield and Lakota were the only ones that were not. So Mrs. Lee is talking about during this forecast, we may get to that point, which would be a benefit, but at the same time, I think it's important to point out, there's legislation being proposed right now to alleviate that altogether, which means we wouldn't benefit from it if and when we do reach that point, right?
Correct.
Okay, I think that's important.
I think it's very important. This is probably the most misunderstood, common misconception out there, right? That, hey, I just took a huge property tax increase. The schools are benefiting from that. Why would they present a levy? Or why are they saying there's concerns in the forecast? And that's what it comes down to right there. But explaining that intricate detail across an entire school district is tough.
Right. Explaining it in your kitchen table with your family is tough, right? Like, they don't know, they're saying the same thing, so. This slide is just a pie chart of where our revenues come from, for the most part. For the majority, 48% of the district revenue is local property taxes. 40% is coming from the state, and then 12% is kind of everything else, so. Oops, I forget I have to flip and read. This illustrates us approaching the 20 mil floor. So the line at the top, the dark grayish line, is our voted millage. So we've voted 60 mils for support of the school district, but over time, because of those reduction factors, your millage is decreasing. And so this is showing how quickly we're hitting the floor, which is the yellow dotted line across the screen. It's going to hit probably next fiscal year. So from the notes from the unrestricted state aid, just the assumptions that were built into our forecast. So we have a forecasting software that actually mirrors the way the state funds schools. So we make an assumption on what our real estate values are going to be, what our enrollment demographics are going to be, and it calculates what our state aid will be. So it's updated all the cost inputs. It does assume that the phase-in of this fair school funding will continue. I know there has been some dialogue that perhaps that will change, but we have to wait for a new budget bill to see if they change that or not. So right now, we're assuming it's going to be implemented the way it is currently written. Based on those inputs, we're looking at a 2.4% decrease in funding for this year. Next year, we're pretty much okay. The following year, we'll have a 10% decrease in state funding, both restricted and unrestricted. And that is based on the increase in wealth of the district itself. So our increase in property values, as well as the increase in income for Fairfield residents, will cause a decrease in state funding. So if the state perceives you're wealthier, they think you can pay more for your schools, and they will contribute less.
Right, and I think that's another misconception people think, because that's just the opposite. And going back to what you said, Mr. Smith, a moment ago about the 20 mil floor, there's some, if I remember correctly, some Hamilton County schools that really benefited well. That could change, and if we get to that point, at 20 mil, we also lose some flexibility on our side as a district with that too. Am I correct in that?
It is.
Yeah, and then with the state decreasing because we're wealthy to a point, that's kind of a misunderstood perception, I think, as well.
I agree.
It's not apples and oranges.
Correct.
Okay.
So how does that jive with the percentage of students we have that are on free and reduced lunches? They're socially, economically challenged.
Yes, I'm sitting here asking myself the same question. You know, we appear to be wealthier, but our percentage of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch continues to go up dramatically. I'm pretty confident we're up over 50%, maybe 55% right now. And 5 years ago, we may have been 30-something%, but it just increases at a steady pace. Yeah, and I have the same question, you know, what is that, you know, how are we becoming wealthier as a community, but our student population is not, you know, they're requiring more assistance and supports. I don't. I can't answer that question.
Another apples and oranges.
Yeah.
Do they base that on average income for the city of Fairfield or property value or?
It's a combination of both. So it is your real estate tax base as well as your income. So that income from income tax returns for residents in the Fairfield City School District is going up. But you're also compared and slotted into quartiles with the rest of the state. So you might have other areas of the state that are getting poorer, for lack of a better word, and that would put us maybe in a different tier because somebody has come below. Like maybe we haven't really moved, maybe other people are moving below us, and I don't have that granular level of detail for that information. So it might be you're staying kind of the same. I do know Fairfield's income from the income tax returns has gone up, but did more districts go down, and that's what's caused the issue. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Here is a quick snapshot of the expenditure breakdown from the forecast. In general, 76% of our expenses are based on salaries and fringe benefits, which is not surprising because we don't create things, we teach people, and that requires humans. The assumptions underlying the salaries, we have a current contractual agreements in place with both of our unions. They're 2-year agreements, they expire this year. So in that agreement is a 2% raise. We have projected, based on historical numbers and the current collective bargaining agreements, 2% raises for fiscal years 26, that should say 29, that is my typo, I apologize. In terms of staffing levels, for this year, we added 2 integration coaches, which were shifted out of ESSER funding, so they're now general fund obligations for us. 3 English language learner teachers, 2 speech, 2 OTs. We also added 4 special ed positions and 8 preschool education assistants. And then we also took into account the efficiencies that Lance was able to achieve in transportation, and we were able to reduce 8 bus drivers due to getting rid of some routes. For next year, we're adding an English language learner, or English language teacher, and another preschool unit, which is 1 teacher and 2 aides. And then for fiscal years 27 through 29, we're projecting to increase another English language learner teacher in each of those years. Try it. There we go. From a benefits standpoint, in January of '24, we had a 6% increase in our health insurance rates. The insurance rates that are in effect for open enrollment that is going on or just concluded is 11.9. That'll take effect in January 1st. Then we're projecting a 10% increase in health insurance rates for every year thereafter. In addition, the special ed IDEA grant fund does not have enough funding levels to take care of all the benefits for all the staff that are paid out of that grant. So we have to project that some of those benefits will be coming back into the general fund. One of the pieces of good news is our health insurance provider did offer a lower cost plan last year. Not many people signed up for it last year, but we're hoping that based on the feedback that they're getting of the people who actually like that plan and think it works well, that maybe enrollment numbers will be better in the lower cost plan, which might provide us with some cost savings, but we won't know till we get the results of open enrollment. This graph is just showing an overall comparison of our revenues, which are in the rust color, to our expenditures, which are in the gold color. You can see that revenues are relatively flat throughout the life of the forecast, while our expenditures are growing at a pretty rapid pace. I think it's about 3.3% per year. That's going to be a hard graph to see, but it's just a summary of the 5-year forecast. In general, we continue to operate with an operating deficit every year of the forecast and continuing to have an operating deficit every year that is growing larger, we are going to erode our cash balances, and we'll have negative cash projected in FY '29. And this is just another graphical depiction of the erosion of the cash balance. And this is a slide showing the days of cash we'll have on hand. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends that schools have a minimum of 60 days of cash on hand so that you can meet your operational needs, payroll, utilities, those kinds of things. By the end of FY '27, we will be very close to that minimum. 64 days of operating cash at the end of '27. This is a slide that the State Department of Education and Workforce uses to determine the financial health of a district, and it shows your operating deficits over the course of time. So it goes back to '22 through '29, the life of the forecast, and they'll use this to trigger districts for monitoring. Any district that starts to get in that orange shade could be flagged for potential monitoring from the Department of Education. And so as you can see, we kind of approaching the orange shade starting in about, it's hard for me to see that far, 27, 28, we're getting into the red, and 29, we're fully in the red. To summarize the presentation, our revenues are experiencing very little growth. Our last levy was approved in November 2011, and at that time, we thought it would last 2 to 3 years. So we're obviously well outside of that projection and range. It also looks to us, based on calculations, that the district will become a guarantee district in FY '29. What it means to be a guarantee district is your level of calculated state funding falls below the level your state funding was in FY '21. So there's a safety net in the formula that says you won't get less money than you got in '21. And it looks, based on current projections, like the district will be at that guarantee level in FY '29.
Is that 21 just that particular year, or is it a 8-year?
No, they set the year right now, the way it's written is, it's FY '21.
Okay.
So might it change as we get further, closer to '29, maybe? But right now, '21 is the benchmark year. So it was 21 for this year, it'll be 21 for next year. I don't know if anyone has any other questions at this time?
All right, question, just comments. Thank you for putting this together. It's never easy, it's never simple to explain, and I would suggest the community residents and just go out and look at this as much as you can. Try to understand it, ask questions. It's not a simple thing. There's not a simple answer. Mr. Smith and Nancy at the time and Ms. Lee now have done a great job with looking through to try to cut costs and to where to trim some expenses, just like Mr. Perry has done with the transportation. But it's not easy. I mean, on this one slide, the financial health indicator, the largest contributor is, state funding is getting less and less. And part of it, maybe we're wealthy, but part of it is a lot of things are mandated that we don't always get the earmarked dollars. Expenditures goes up. Insurance is 76% this year of our total expenses.
Benefits are.
Or benefits, yeah.
Benefits
I'm
and
sorry.
salaries.
Salaries and benefits, yes. I know I maybe get this year wrong, 21, 22. I know the medical benefits went up 17%, 6% now, then projected 10%. So that continues to climb when everything else doesn't. Maintaining the buildings, the air conditioning, the buses, all that has gone up 20% or more. So there's a lot of factors. So just, it's not an easy discussion, easy thing to see, but I just, again, encourage the community to put eyes on it, read it, look into it, ask some questions amongst yourselves, but the administration here and Mrs. Lee have done a great job with presenting it, and we try to get in front of as much as we can to trim off as much as we can, and it's getting thinner and thinner. But thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Other comments? Questions?
I also just want to thank you for putting this together and presenting it. As Mr. Clark said, it's not an easy task to basically take somebody 7,000 years to learn every formula and understand the ever-changing, adapting rules and regulations and taxation, to be able to make that into terms for people who don't do that every day to understand. It's a true miracle, and we really appreciate the work you're doing and putting that together for us. I completely agree with Scott. The district has done everything they can so far and will continue to do what they can with what we have. And I appreciate the administration for all of your guys' hard work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also want to echo those sentiments. I mean, I was thinking about this earlier today. You know, if I had to project what my budget for my household is going to be next year, I'd be like, well, I don't know what groceries are going to cost. I don't know how much electricity is going to be. I don't know how much gas is going to be. So I appreciate that you're able to make these projections, knowing that they're going to change over time, they're going to need to be adjusted, but especially since you just jumped into this role recently and you know, really hit the ground running and been able to provide us with all this information, I really, really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Amy, for all the hard work you do on this. Do you know when the legislators are voting on what Billy was talking about?
And that proposed legislation, I think that's something I just read this week. Yeah, so I don't think there's a vote looming, but it's been proposed.
Okay, so we won't know
Yeah.
till down the road. Okay.
I think we talked about one of the biggest misconceptions. Another one is, where does our revenue come from? And I think the general public would think that most of it comes from the state. And in fact, that's not the case. Only 40% of the state, of our budget is provided by the state, 48% by local tax dollars. And so that input by the local community really decides a huge part of our revenue moving forward. And as you said, revenue hasn't changed much, but expenses are, right? I think most people understand the power of compounded interest. And you look at the medical insurance going up 8%, 10%, year after year after year after year. And we all feel that in our own medical insurance that may work outside of the school system. So I think people understand that. Makes it tough. Makes it tough. A lot to discuss here going forward.
One thing, Mr. Begg, is, again, you alluded to that levy from 2011. I know we spoke about it before, and you, again, alluded to it lasting so long. That is huge. You know, projecting 2 to 3 years, 4 years maybe, and has gone on almost 14 years. That's incredible.
Right.
And that's because of what you all are doing and what the administration's doing to do the right thing, to be good stewards. So I think it's worth bringing up again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Mrs. Lee.
And I want to thank Nancy. She was great about taking my calls and scheduling meetings with me about how the forecast before looked and was I getting it right? Was I missing something? So I want to publicly thank her for spending a couple hours with me on this project.
I
So
think we would all
That's
concur.
great. Yes, thank you, Mrs. Lee.
Yes, thanks, Ms. Lane.
All right, our next item for discussion is in regard to some IRN numbers and changes. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Begley, members of the board, I'm excited to not be talking about policy with you tonight. Instead, I wanted to just let you know that we as a district are having conversations around making changes to the information retrieval numbers, commonly referred to as IRNs. I've used the term IRN so many times, but never thought about, like, what does that actually stand for? Information retrieval numbers. We're looking to change those that for our freshman school, our high school, and the academy. So an IRN is just a unique number assigned to each school building, and it's used by the state to track and report our educational data. The state pulls the student testing data from an IRN, and then that is the data that's used to create our school's report cards. Currently, our freshman school and our high school have separate IRNs, resulting in our 9th grade student data being in one report card and our 10th through 12th grade student data being in a different report card. And after doing some research, we found that we are one of only 2 school districts in the state who have separate report cards for their freshman school and their senior high. All the other high school report cards have 9th through 12th grade student data combined. And we believe that by combining the data, having our freshman student data and our 10th through 12th student data kind of join forces, it could have a positive impact on our high school report card moving forward. Not to mention, along with just allowing us to more accurately compare ourselves to other neighboring high schools that we know we're always being compared to. We want to make sure our data is being reported the same way so that we can compare apples to apples and see how we're doing, as how we stack up against everybody else. Additionally, the Academy does not have its own IRN, so students that attend the Academy are currently linked to either Crossroads if they're a middle school student, the freshman school, or the high school IRN. And what we found is that most other districts with schools that are similar to the Academy, they assign an IRN to that school so that the students that are attending that school, so the students attending the Academy, their data would be pulled off of those other schools' report cards and put on their own distinct report card. And these changes, I do want to say, they will in no way change or negatively impact the services that we're currently providing our students. We're just going to work to alter the way that we're reporting the data to be more consistent with how all of the other school districts in the state are doing that, so that as we're compared, it's a fair comparison. There is going to be quite a bit of work behind the scenes that will need to be done. Mrs. Aug has already been working on that with her team. But just wanted to bring that to your attention and see if you had any questions or anything before we started to dive more deeply into that work.
Yeah, so the board supports this, right?
Yes.
Makes perfect sense.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
All right, our last item for discussion is in regard to some preschool staffing. This time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hustle.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Bagley, members of the board. Just a quick item here about preschool staffing. I sent you an email last week, sort of the same information here. Due to rising preschool student enrollment numbers, the district will need to add an additional preschool teacher and 2 preschool educational assistants at East Elementary. These staffing additions are mandated by the Office for Exceptional Children due to our staff preschool ratio numbers, so the district is required to fill the vacancies there. Do you have any questions I can answer for you? Thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you.